Now, there's nothing worse than what's it all about. I shall be clean shaven in a moment. Right. As my material is only really about 2000, well, it is only about 2002, 3 to 2005, 6. I can say this without being sucked off on a tangent. If you look at thehighwire.com episode, I'm pretty sure it's 261, entitled California Screaming, there's a really good example of what it's about. Why would I have wanted to see this film 20 years ago? There's two parts, two aspects to that episode. And old Dell does really rather big up his own trumpet. He's even got excerpts of him 4 or 5 years ago doing some journalism. Anyway, to the point. First of all, in passing really, but it's good to see, there is a man, I forget his name, about 65, 70, who has been a very senior production executive, I think at Sky, maybe Channel 4, but maybe ITV at some point. Anyway, you can, listening to this chap talking over 5 or 10 minutes, I mean, it's quite obvious that the last few years there has been, well, he says, I mean, I'm a measured, no hype person. He speaks in terms of has been an interference with mainstream media that's never been known before. That is something completely new. I mean, the implication being, since mainstream media began. Now, please note they use the good term. I wish we had simple terms. They just simply say independent media. So he refers to thehighwire.com, which isn't perfect by any means, as independent media. I mean, they quite rightly point out the BBC have become problematical. Anyway, so when you have a real Jobsworth desk-bound type who doesn't really go for the limelight, speaking out in the way he does in that episode, it's worth watching. You know, you realise you have there's a constant need to fight certain things. And is it in that he refers to, we're going to segue into the more important thing. So there's a lady on from a civil rights organisation in California, and she about 35, 40, she has got a printout with I think it's 11 or 12 problematic new bills that have been presented for not really debate prior to being put into the legislature. And any ordinary person can see that a few of them really are problematical. So, see, this is the thing. That lady, if I'd have seen her on television speaking as she is, or has been very, very recently, 20 years ago, I'd feel small. I'd feel, well, you have a few people, not many of them, but a few people like she is now and has been the last few months, year, diligently plodding away using the potential of legal cases to fight for pretty standard human rights aspects of the modern existence. And nobody can argue with her approach, she intends to use the legal system and is doing a little bit of lobbying of politicians, having, well, her credentials of the work that she's doing, which is clearly responsible, measured, and intended only to be attacking, using the various organs of modern democracy. Is it three or four aspects of counterbalancing aspects of modern democracy? So if I'd have seen that woman talking now, her age, me, her age, I would have felt small. Like, I can't possibly be that person. I can't possibly, she's brave, there's some risk to this. She's going to put herself in a position where who knows who within whatever administration is going to have her as a kind of possible future person to target. Who knows how? The purpose of this film is to make, the reality is that the system the system of checks and balances which she is accessing, that's all we really have in the UK as well. But there isn't a tradition, anything like so much a tradition. I mean, she's talking about it, it's very impressive, in a business-like, that's the key thing, business-like, as if it's a norm. I mean, they're sitting there referring to a few of the bills being virtually totalitarian and ridiculous, and who'd have thought these kinds of potential bills would come along. Nevertheless, the counterattack is businesslike, measured. Now, I did that, but I had no cultural icon to look at, cultural reference to look at in Britain that I can really relate to, and in a way that kind of bolsters me along, because that's what you need. You need to be bolstered along by the notion that it is a norm, that you do it, there are risks, it can go wrong, blah, blah, blah. And so really the film is to actually speak to me 20 years ago, before you're out of your depth, baptism of fire, and nobody says, well, actually, why haven't I written a book? Because actually, these last 20 years, and it's nothing to do with my minor role over a few years. Well, it is in that I realised, well, yeah, nobody helps you. You have to, if you're going to take something forward, if you're going to counterattack, you kind of think, you send a fax off to a judge that's a little bit cheeky, to say the least, and says, mate, I'm going all the way. But then you have the hollow feeling of, yeah, but how? And I suppose it's going to be a lot of work. And here's the point, but you don't regret doing it. But then you have to train yourself. You have to go through the adjustment of like, well, I'm going to be having to get up every day at 5 o'clock, always. Try and get a few hours focusing on this, and then do my normal life, being with my child, etc., etc. And it's the getting up at 5 o'clock. The great majority of people I know who, and you have to, there's no if, the great majority of people I know who profess leftish sort of resistance beliefs and attitudes, if you speak to them about, well, I'm sorry, the reality is I had to get up at 5 o'clock every day, and I've stayed in that mode just in case, because if the state or anybody else tries to do some revenge thing on you, well, you better be in the groove such that your absolute optimum efficiency to fight back. And it's the total cynical kind of, oh, it's always done humorously, this cynical kind of, oh, well, you know, my only real genuinely enjoyed friend, he totally does this. I mean, with him and me, it's a kind of act, but it's real nevertheless. You're not taken seriously. You're derided almost. And that's one of the reasons that I just haven't had the heart in me to write a book on this. Because I'm sick. I have been, well, certainly since about 2007. I mean, for 3 or 4 years, I was sort of just not really in a state of shock, but you're on autopilot, and you're not really trying to reconnect with people at a ordinary human level. But having began connecting with people at a ordinary human level, I mean, it takes 3 or 4 years. That's the point. There is a huge price. It takes 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years to sort of get your soul back after these silly diversions into nothing. Just, you know, the job's worth. And when I say job's worth, I mean at a highest judge and politician level. The kind of job's worth won't think for themselves and, you know, listen to any reason up there in charge of society. So you're attacking. It takes you a few years to get you. And sort of reconnecting with people on an ordinary level. Nevertheless, it's like you're derided for the notion that, you know, that you realise it's important to train your body. I mean, there'll be people saying, oh, well, you could just stay up all night doing work. No, particularly in rural areas. And if I'd have lived in a city, I wouldn't have done this thing. There would have been too many, not playful distractions, just the wrong kind of distraction and whatever. This was a thing of the countryside and the bright-eyedness, and that is so good. Healthy, bright-eyed existence, mainly in my child, but in me with my child. You do not encounter this in cities. So fighting to protect, show, whatever, that is what it's about. But in the countryside, the bread sells out at 10 o'clock in the morning, 11, the good bread. Not the fancy pants bread, but the reasonably priced bread that's reasonably wholesome. So your body has to be attuned to being functional pretty much first thing in the morning. So the only way you work around that is you shift your day forward 2 hours. You're working for a few hours in the morning before you have to get into normal life mode, which in the countryside is largely set to mid-morning is peak activity time. There we go. I mean, that sounds pathetic, but that's actually one of the really important. It sounds ridiculous because I know most people aren't going to listen, and I'm sick to death of those conversations. The conversations about, yeah, but if you know, sometimes in life you may have to take life seriously, in which case, you know, voluntarily, not to go to some job, voluntarily, you're training yourself. You got to get the hell up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get that statement sent out, and you train your head to be at its best then, so that you're at your maximum optimal then, and you can get through this thing. And I just became sick, bored of the sort of ennui one. Anyway, but you see, there's been an interesting sort of thing the last year or two. Me, I don't care about anybody's opinions. There is no more shame. Things have kind of moved forward a bit. That sounds wrong. And I always used to think, I don't want to have to talk about this if I ever do it. I don't want to have to go and talk with people. I'm sick to death having the same boring conversations. But now, actually, in a way, I would be ready to do that. So, there we go.